today if you're going to be with me as we talk a little bit about memory. So I want to say this is the first time I'm doing something like this. That is to say, the first time I'm really doing kind of a live stream teaching session to hopefully share a little bit with you about what I have learned. Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining me today. If you're going to be... So, I apologize right now. I'm getting my sound still set up. But anyway, so let's jump right in. If you're joining me right now, what we're going to be talking about today is how to improve your memory, how to make better use of the tools that you already have to be able to remember things and a variety of different things more quickly and more effectively, and probably in a way that's a lot more fun. So let me start by saying, if you're like most people, you probably think that you are bad at remembering things. If you think back to either your time in school or other places where you were expected to memorize things, you probably thought the way that I have to memorize things is to just do it by rote, just bang it into my head by going over and over and over and over the same thing. Whether that's a poem or that's a fact, whether it's like timetables or something like that. And if you've done that, you found that memorization is often very ineffective. You don't remember it for all that long. And you probably are not going to be able to recall much. There's a pretty big loss of capacity based on that sort of rote memorization technique. Maybe you've gone a little bit farther and you know some like mnemonic devices like Please Excuse My Dear Aunt Sally, or other things related to like very common formulae in science or in math. So that's taking it a little bit step further in terms of how you use your memory away from just pure rote memorization, which is to say just pounding that into your head, and using tips and techniques to draw on other capacities that you have to make memorization easier. If you use songs to help you memorize things, that's another sort of mnemonic technique that you might be engaging in. And what we're going to talk about today is going even farther than that and using the power of image visualization in your mind in order to really, really, really supercharge your memory. So I made a video about this that you can find on my YouTube channel if you would like to look at it at some point for a little bit more in-depth discussion of the visualization techniques. But basically the idea is that you might have heard that people have different learning styles, whether that be visual learning or oral learning or oral learning or sort of kinesthetic learning, learning with the body. And it's true that people might have some of these things that are slightly higher or lower in terms of their capacity than other people have. But at the end of the day, something that we need to keep in mind is that all human beings are at their best visual learners. That is to say that things that we see in the world around us, if we have the capacity for sight, are things that are going to stick in our mind most, and things that we can visualize are going to be the easiest to remember. So if we can think of an image of something and make it a really memorable image, that's going to be a lot easier for us to remember than abstract sounds or abstract words or numbers. And so that's what we're going to be tapping into today, is how can we use that inner visualization in our head in order to translate words or numbers or concepts into something that we can remember easily and that we can move quickly from our short-term into our long-term memory. And that's really one of the things that this visualization is going to do for us, is move from that short-term into the long-term memory much more quickly and effectively. So if you're down for that, stay with me and we're going to talk this through. So to begin with, as I talk about sort of visualization, what I really mean is that if you think sort of about human evolutionary history, we are programmed to be able to remember visual cues in our environment more easily than just about anything else, because historically and sort of even prehistorically, our survival very much depended on this capacity. Our survival as human beings depended on our ability to remember things that might be dangerous in our environment, or our ability to remember where food sources were, where shelter sources were. And so our brains are sort of hardwired to be able to easily remember images that we put into our brain, even if those are images that are completely generated by us. And so we can take that and we can turn that into a capacity to translate, say, concepts, numbers, words that are not immediately associated with particular images, and turn that into a visualization in our heads that we use in order to remember things better. So the first application of this that I'm going to talk about is what's called the mnemonic major system. If you're like me, you probably have trouble remembering numbers. And if you want to try and remember numbers, you have to work really, really, really hard. You have to put a lot of work, memorization into it. But you don't actually need to do that if you can sort of harness this power of visualization. And so I'm going to go over and show you the Wikipedia page for the mnemonic major system, and we're going to talk through a little bit about how that works. So here you can see the mnemonic major system. Here is the name. If you want to look up here, this is the URL for the mnemonic major system. So if you look at this, basically the idea is that we translate 0 to 9 into different sounds, different consonant sounds that we can string together to make words. Now, the reason it's only consonants is so that we can actually make larger numbers and add those vowels in without any numerical value assigned to them. So let me explain exactly what we're talking about here. It's a little bit easier to talk about an example as opposed to talk about just in pure concepts. So look here, we've got 0 is assigned the S, the S or Z sound. And this doesn't have to be just the letter S or the letter Z. This can be anything that makes a S or Z sound. So you can have S, soft C, Z, or X, like in xylophone. So to apply this directly into a specific word, let's see. There's something like, well, actually, let's get to the next number, which is 1, and I'll tell you how we exactly put this into practice for visualization. So 1 is T or D sound, or a th or a th sound. So T, D, or TH, like thing or this. Now, because again, we want one number to correspond to one letter. If you need to remember something that has a 1 in it, you can visualize a letter that has, or a word that has a T or a D alone, and some sort of vowels in it in order to make it a full word. So like something that's commonly used for just the number 1. If you need to remember just the number 1 for some reason, it would be like tie, T-I-E, like a men's necktie that you wear. You can visualize that in your head. Or die, as in like something that you use to play dice with. One individual of dice. You can visualize that to represent the number 1. Now, what we're going to be doing eventually is, if you need to remember, which is almost always more than just one number, we have to put these things together into some sort of story, but we can put that into some sort of story that you can visualize. So continuing on, the letter 2 is represented by N, and that's a N sound. So anything that creates N sound. So it could be night, right? It doesn't have to be night as in K-N-I-G-H-T. If there's a silent letter there, that's fine too. 3 is represented by M, a M sound. It's easy to remember N is 2 and M is 3 because N has 2 lines and M has 3 lines. Finally, then we get to 4, and that's an R sound. So normally represented by the letter R. And you can remember this, something to help you remember this is 4 ends with R. 5 is a L sound, L. Again, if you look at the what helps you remember this, L and the Roman numeral for 50. So 50 is got a 5 in it. You know, that's how you do it. 6 is ch or j. So like soft J, CH, SH, soft C as in cello. This is what you're going to use to remember 6. 7 is a hard K or G sound, K or G, which could be K, C, Q, or G. 8 is either a F or a V. And remember that F and V, those are the same sounds, just voiced and unvoiced. So that's to say F and V are the same sound. It's just a difference of whether or not your vocal cords are vibrating. And then you go on to 9. That's P or B, P or B. The easy thing to remember 9 corresponding to those sounds is that that P or B look kind of like a 9 all mixed around. So then when we get to 10, if you wanted to do 10, you would add 1 and 0. That's a T or a D sound and an S sound or a Z sound or Z together. You add those together, you add some vowel in there, and you create a word. So not just a single letter, but you create a word that represents 10. So D plus Z is, you add a letter like, or you add a vowel like, say, I, and you get dice. So if you can think of dice, so 2 dies, if you can think of that, that can represent the letter or the number 10. This is going to seem really confusing at first, and it is true that you just have to memorize this system. You just have to memorize what numbers correspond to what letters. But once you have that, you have the making of the possibility of translating numbers into letters, which means translating them then into words. And once you translate them into words, you can easily conceptualize, visualize what these numbers are. This is still very abstract, right? But when we get to talking about how you memorize, say, scripture verses, this is going to make a lot more sense. So just hold with me. Keep in mind where this memory system is. Take stock of, again, the website, the Wikipedia site, so you can go back and look at this again over and over, maybe make some flashcards of what numbers correspond to what letters. And also just realize as we're going through this whole system, this is new. This is going to be a skill that you have to acquire. But once you acquire it, this all becomes very, very, very easy for you to put in place. And it's going to make memorization a lot faster and a lot more permanent. So don't worry if it feels difficult at first. It's going to feel difficult at first because it is a new skill, but once you get used to that skill, once you learn and live into that skill a little bit, you're going to be much better at using your memory. So I talked about visualization and how this is going to help us translate concepts that are not easily remembered or words into things that are much more easily remembered. It's a lot easier to go through and just talk about this process from the perspective of an example than actually talk about this process in the abstract. So I'm going to go over to the verse that the Bible app talks about memorizing today's memory verse. And we're going to talk about how we can turn this verse, which is Psalm 16:11 from the King James Version of the Bible, from just words into something that's easily memorized as images. So we see here Psalm 16:11. Thou wilt show me the path of life. In thy presence is fullness of joy. At thy right hand there are pleasures forevermore. Now, normally, if you were going to try and memorize this, what you would have to do is you would just have to sit down and read it over and over and over and over and over again until you kind of got it stuck in your head. Well, we can make that process a lot shorter and have a lot less time spent just going over and over and over the words, and make it stick for you better by turning these words into images. Now, some of these words are automatically just things that you can think of as images. So path, right hand, these are things that just automatically can bring to mind some sort of associated image. But you might be asking yourself, okay, what do I do with something like thou or shoe or presence in the concept as sort of the idea of being in the presence of someone? How do you turn that into an immediately memorable image? Well, what you do is you turn these words into things that they kind of sound like that can be made into images. And I'll show you down here what that looks like. I've got this translated into words that sound like, but aren't exactly necessarily the thing, that you can easily think of as images. So, for instance, for me, when I'm memorizing anything that has thous and these in it, the thou can be difficult to turn into a specific image. And so I have just translated that out and said, every time I think of a cow, like the animal, that's going to stand for thou. So I think of cow, wilt, shoe, as in something you wear on your feet, meet, path, light. What I'm saying here is I'm translating the main points of this verse into things that I can easily think of. So for instance, I can think of a cow that is either in a giant shoe, whatever that shoe might look like, and it's wilting. It's wilting like a flower is wilting. And then maybe that flower wilting cow is then being turned into meat or is eating meat or something like that on some sort of path. Think of whatever sort of is the most memorable idea of a path you can do. So maybe there's a lot of pink stones, or the path is really, really, really small that you're fitting this on. So one of the things to remember in visualization is that if you turn things into very big or very small or very outlandish features, it's easier to stick in your mind. And then imagine that there's a light. So maybe it's like the Pixar light that you have from the sort of the Pixar introduction is being shined. You can imagine even in your head the sound of the light, the whoop 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 coming down the road, and that is being shined on this cow that is wilting in a shoe and then either being turned into meat or is eating meat, something like that. Or if light doesn't work for you, lice, right? So like life kind of sounds like both light and lice. The point is that you're not trying to make a perfect representation of the meaning of this phrase. You're trying to make something that will allow you to go back and recall the individual words and then put them back together. So you can do the same thing with the second sentence. So in thigh, so like your thigh on your leg, you can think of someone who has a really, really, really big thigh compared to the rest of their body. Or in thigh could sort of mean India. You could the sounds maybe come together that way. And so some sort of image like the Taj Mahal or something that you associate with India, and then associate that some way with presents. So like Christmas presents. So you can imagine like Santa delivering lots and lots of Christmas presents to the Taj Mahal. And then also like coming out of the water there, right, at the fountains in front of the Taj Mahal, think of so for fullness, I often, if anything that's got Ness in it, I think of the Loch Ness monster. That's just sort of a remembrance point for me. So think of like a foal, a young horse being eaten by the Loch Ness monster after Santa has delivered these presents to the Taj Mahal. And maybe there's, instead of, so you could think of Joy as in like the movie that Jennifer Lawrence was in. Think of Jennifer Lawrence as Joy, or Joey, maybe Joey from Friends, or a Joey as a in the sense of a young kangaroo, something that's going to make that in your head. Think of that looking on at this whole scene, these presents being delivered to the Taj Mahal in India, while a young horse is being eaten by the Loch Ness monster. And think of Joy from the movie Joy, Jennifer Lawrence as Joy, or Joey from Friends, or a young kangaroo laughing at this whole thing happening. So you want to put all of these words together in some way. If you can add action in there, that's going to be more memorable too. But basically what the point is that you want to be able to code these images with the words that you want to remember, so that when you see the images in your mind's eye, you can automatically recall what the words are and quickly translate what they are. So then for the last part of this, at thy right hand there are pleasures forevermore. Think about someone actually like putting out their right hand. So maybe this is you putting your right hand, or someone you can kind of imagine. Maybe it's actually the Joy or the Joey, to connect it up from the last verse, putting out their right hand, and it's really big. So again, make it really big or really small to remember it better. You want to then translate there are, and there are kind of sounds like terror to me. Plush, this is pleasures is what we want to translate. Plush shores kind of sounds like pleasure. And again, remember, that doesn't have to sound exactly like the word, but it's close enough to be able to remind you. So think of like they're at a beach or something, and there is shores that are covered in velour or something that makes you thinking of them being plush, and they're in terror. They're just absolutely completely terrified. And then forevermore, this is the last part of this. Imagine them being utterly terrified at four ravens, forevermore. So what we're thinking of is like ravens from Edgar Allan Poe's The Raven, saying nevermore, which is close enough to evermore. So there's four of them, and this is what the plush beach, whatever, the velour beach, is scared of. If you're with me still at this point, this sounds crazy. I know that. I know that this sounds like this is never going to work. But I really think if you're able to sort of turn these concepts into images, you're going to have a much better time remembering them. You're going to find that actually when you go back to try and translate from the images back into words, it's much faster. And the time that you put creating images for yourself is time that you spent sort of dwelling on the text. So even if you can't make good images, you're still going to have better remembrance than you would have if you were just trying to do this by rote memorization. Now, I'll say you might find that it's easier for you to write out the images and sort of have the story there for you and then try to image it in your head. You might find that it's easier for you to do what I've done here, which is to say, write it out, the text that you need to remember, and then write out whatever things you want to image, and then go through in your mind and image them. But in either case, the important thing to do is to come up with really, really vivid images and translate those into translate the words that you're trying to remember into those really vivid images. Now, this works for more than just Bible verses, of course. This can also work for historical dates. So let's say you're trying to remember Shakespeare, whatever Shakespeare's birthday was. You can translate, say, the name Shakespeare into some person shaking a spear, like physically doing that, thinking of someone physically shaking a spear. And then you go back over to the dates or to the numbers we had over here when we were talking about the major mnemonic system, And whatever Shakespeare's birth date was, you translate that into a word. Let me look up what that date is, and we can figure out a way to translate that. So Shakespeare was born in 1564. How do we turn 1564 into an image? So we go to 1, so that's a T or a D sound, and 5, that's an L sound. And then 6 is a ch or a j sound, and then 4 is an sound. So 1 and 5, a T and an L sound can be tile. So you think about tile, and a 6, ch or j sound, and 4 is a chair. So you can think about someone standing on a chair, shaking a spear, and maybe the chair falls over and it breaks a tile or something like that. But somehow putting the image of a tile, a chair, and someone shaking a spear into one sort of visualization is going to give you the capacity to remember much more quickly that Shakespeare was born in 1564 than you would have otherwise. Now, if you want to take this even farther and say add more specific dates, so days of months, you just add this on further. So we know that the months can be translated from 1 to 12. You take the month, or if you are use date first, take the date and then put the month and turn those numbers into letters as well. And I'll tell you, there's a really great app, at least for iOS, that you can use called Numzi, Numzi, that will automatically, if you put any number in there, turn it into a word or series of words that follow this major system in order to help you visualize any number that you need to know. So let's take this back over to Psalm 16:11, because you've got this visualization of the verse itself, but when you're memorizing it, you probably want to memorize that it's from Psalm 16:11 as well. Well, the way that you're going to do that is you're going to come up with some image that you think of as psalm. So that might be like someone singing a song. That's probably the easiest thing. Whatever you think of is going to be singing a song. And the first thing you're going to do then is think about 16. So that's 1, a T or a D sound, and 6, a sh or j sound. So one word you can come up with is thatch. And then 11, that's 2 T's or 2 D sounds. Maybe you think of the word dad, D-A-D. That's a good thing for dad. So you think of your dad, whoever your dad is. Think of your dad in your mind's eye, and think of him being thatched, like he's covered in thatch roofing. So now your dad, covered in thatch roofing, is singing a song, and in the process of singing this song, maybe out of his mouth comes this cow who falls into a shoe, begins to wilt, and then eats meat. This is how you're going to connect up Psalm 16:11 with the verse itself, so you can remember both the verse reference and the verse itself. Again, what we're talking about here sounds really crazy, but I promise if you give it a try and you do it regularly, it's going to help you remember things much, 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 much better. This is just a little bit about how you use image visualization, but again, it can work for anything that you need to remember verbatim. It can work for shopping lists if you need to. You can visualize the things on your shopping list. It can work for poetry that you want to remember. It can work for historical dates. You think of something related to the concept that you need to remember, and then you associate that with the numbers translated to images, and it'll help you remember dates better. It can help you remember phone numbers. It can help you remember the street addresses. Anything that is difficult and requires you to do a lot of rote memorization, think about doing this visualization technique, try it and practice it. This is a skill that requires you to practice, but one thing you can do to practice is either like do what I'm showing here, do memory verses every day, do just a short verse every day, and you can look at something like the Bible app from YouVersion. That's available on iOS, and I think it's available on Android as well. Yes, it is. Oh, it's available for your computer too. You get that, and there's a memory verse every day that you can look at. Try to memorize that verse. It's going to get easier and easier the more you do it. Or you can just go to Wikipedia and look at different lists of top cities or top countries for population or whatever, and create visualizations of those lists, associating them with numbers from 1 to 20 or 1 to 10. Memorize each day the top 10 or the top 5 of some sort of thing. Top 5, I don't know, alligator attacks. Top 5 most populated cities in the United States. And by doing that, you are going to be exercising this visualization technique. Now, after a couple times doing this, once you have memorized a particular thing and you've gone back and reviewed it a couple times, while you're reviewing, for those first couple times, you need to make sure that you really remember the image as well. You want that to really stick in your head, because that's going to be what's helpful for moving you from short-term to long-term memory. But eventually, those images are going to disappear, and you're just going to have the words. So you don't need to worry about the fact that forever you're going to have these really crazy and potentially scandalous images associated with passages from scripture or poetry that you want to remember. Eventually, the images will fall away, and all you'll have are the words. But this does say that you need to memorize on a somewhat consistent schedule. You need to go back and make sure you review, not every day. You don't need to over review, but you do need to review from time to time. And one of the things that you can do with that is, if you haven't looked at Anki as a memory tool, I would highly recommend getting the app Anki and looking at it. It uses a spaced repetition system, which is going to... Sorry, I'm looking this up for you right now. It uses a spaced repetition system, which is going to bring up the things that you want to remember right as you're about to forget them. And what that's going to help you do is maximize your memory time. Now, when you've done that, when you combine that with your image visualization, you're going to save a lot of time over standard rote memorization, because all you have to do is, once you've memorized a Bible verse, you pop it into your Anki. You, on one side of a flashcard is the verse itself. On the other side of the flashcard, and these are of course digital flashcards, is the verse reference. So let's say Romans 10:3 or Psalm 16:11, like we were just talking about today. And then every so often it will ask you, okay, Psalm 16:11, and then you have to remember what that is. And if you get it right, there's a longer interval then before it asks you to remember again. If you get it wrong, there's a shorter interval before it asks you to remember it again. And by doing that, and by doing the visualization, you're going to save so much time. You're going to put it into your long-term memory, and you're going to have that there with you going forward really indefinitely. And this is true, again, with poetry. This is true with historical dates. This is true with math formulae. You can do this with formulae by translating those numbers and symbols into images that you can visualize. And this is true about scripture references. If you have any questions, go ahead and hit me up at Theodramatist on Twitter. Or you can drop them in the comment section here, and I'm more than willing to try and engage with those. This is difficult. I know it is difficult, but it's going to save you in the long term a lot of time. And I ask you, just try it. Try to do this visualization technique from memory, and you're going to find out that you are a much better rememberer than you ever thought you were going to be able to be before. So thanks for joining me here today. This is my first attempt at doing a live stream teaching of any sort. It was unscripted, so I hope you were able to stay with me somewhat and continue to be in conversation. Let me know how these things go. If they do go well, let me know about that. If you have difficulty with these memorization techniques, DM me. My DMs are always open. Leave a comment, tweet at me, and let's see if we can troubleshoot it a little bit. But really, try it. Give it a shot. Give it a week of doing this daily with something that you're going to try and memorize. And I promise at the end of that time, you're going to be memorizing much better than you ever were before. So thanks for staying with me today. And I hope that